Chapter 23 May 1986 Shanghai Part 2 Little Red creased her brow. "Mama, I think maybe we should pause construction there for a while. Just long enough for a thorough review. Russia had a big nuclear disaster last week. According to VOA, it could be the worst nuclear power catastrophe since the 1957 accident in Windscale, England." "I saw the news about that tonight on TV," Zoe said thoughtfully. "It's hard to compare it to Windscale until we know more about what happened." She wasn't sure how many people had died at Windscale. She thought maybe 40, but she clearly remembered the cause. A failure in temperature gauges virtually destroyed 2 reactors, which had to be entombed in concrete. "I know. The Russian government is trying to cover it up. Neighboring countries are still in shock." "Or what caused the accident?" Little Red shook her head. "Don't know exactly. The VOA said that the plant was having a drill during a maintenance shutdown. Somehow, the test went wrong. So bad that even with a fully operating safety system, the explosions ripped apart the reactor and scattered nuclear dust all the way to Scandinavia." "Was it a pressurized water reactor like Qingshan?" asked Zoe. "Not exactly. It is a graphite-moderated one, but both are light water reactors anyway." Zoe considered this information. The mass of graphite means a slow temperature rise or cool down, which might explain why it was too late when they noticed the temperature irregular change. "Did VOA report any casualties?" 10 people died in the explosion, and about 300 were hospitalized with severe radiation burns. The radiation level at the site is already 50,000 times higher than normal, so they expect more deaths from radiation poisoning over the next few months. It'll be decades before the area is safe for habitation again. In the meantime, thousands more will die from cancers caused by the radiation." Little Red heaved a sigh. "Do you think something like that could happen here?" Zoe hesitated. "That will depend on whether our leaders are willing to review the project and be rigorous about testing and safety protocols. You know how sensitive they are about security classification." She sighed, wishing the government was more open to examination and criticism. Even though China had formally joined the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1984, the Ministry of Nuclear Industry still operated under the same shroud of secrecy and paranoia. Perpetually afraid of losing face amongst the international community, the government made sure that none of the documents on IAEA standards suggested China was in any way falling behind other developed countries. But the Qingshan nuclear power plant was the country's first locally designed project. Behind closed doors, Zoe and her colleagues weren't confident that the plant was safe, because no foreign expert or IAEA representatives had ever examined it. Their only way to avoid an incident like Chernobyl happening in China is to halt our construction and invite the IAEA in for a full-scale safety check. This is not the time to worry about being laughed at by other countries. In 2 years' time, when construction is complete, it will be too late to change the design, particularly if the problem concerns the fundamental structures." She paused as another thought struck her. "Just between you and me, I'm worried about designing Pakistan's Cheshma nuclear power plant. If we haven't proven the success of our own design, how can we guarantee it will work in Pakistan? Director Chow told me he put my name in for that project. I hope it won't start too soon, at least not until we get some input from Western experts. I'd much rather wait until we finish building and can test our own power plant first." She checked the steaming pan and spooned the dumplings onto plates. Time to eat now." Yummy as always." Little Red ate eagerly. Zoe picked up their conversation. How is your work going? Tonight's news reminds us how important nuclear safety is. Okay. Lots of reading, Little Red said. She then put her chopsticks down and looked at Zoe. I know you don't like talking about it, Mama, but I have to ask, especially now. What kind of radiation caused Baba's death? How much was he exposed to? You know, one time I mentioned Baba's death to Chief Engineer Fan, and I think that's why they reassigned me to the nuclear safety unit. Oh, really? Little Red hadn't asked about her father in more than 10 years, and Zoe had hoped that would be the last time she ever had to mention his name. Still, she was surprised at the impact Major Leo's death had on Little Red's life. She took a deep breath and hurried through the words. There was no autopsy or any tests done during his sickness, so I really don't know for sure. The only certainty was that his death was caused by lethal radiation. But you told me that you were both working for a mine. I did some research a while ago. Only lead, zinc, iron, coal, and copper were mined at the Qinghai-Tibet Plateau. There wouldn't have been any radiation, unless... Little Red paused, searching Zoe's face. Unless Baba was poisoned by fallout from a nuclear bomb test. Zoe reached for another dumpling from the pan, but her hand shook so badly she had to lay the chopsticks back on the table. She nodded, afraid to look at Little Red and consumed by guilt and shame for the lies she'd told. Looking back, she could see how stupid the story was, but at the time, she supposed it was an inevitable response. They called Major Leo a hero to cover up their own ignorance about how lethal the radiation fallout would be. More accurately, the scientists had only been concerned with the bomb's destructive power. To today's generation, such naivete sounded ridiculous, but even after all these years, she didn't know how to tell the whole truth. Right before one of the nuclear bomb tests, your father insisted on going into the Forbidden Zone to look for a nomadic family. He must have been too close to Ground Zero. Neither of them spoke for a while, unwilling to continue the conversation. Little Red finally broke the silence. Was it because of his death that you decided to leave nuclear weapon research? Zoe twisted her fingers together to steady her hands, trying to gather enough courage to continue the conversation. This was the moment she'd avoided for years. I decided to leave because I missed you, Wei Po, and Wei Gung so much. And you know the party made the final decision, just like they do now. You didn't like Baba, did you? Little Red asked in a low voice, staring at the half-eaten dumpling in her bowl. No, Zoe said. She couldn't hide her feelings from Little Red any longer, and wouldn't deny it. No, 221 Plant was her past, a different life altogether. It was over. So why did the past still terrify her? Actually, I think you hated him so much that you wanted to erase him from existence. That's why you have never talked about him. That's why you don't have any photos of him. Nonsense! Zoe tried to mask her emotions by picking up the empty bowls and taking them into the kitchen. She didn't dare imagine how devastated Little Red would feel if she learned her father was in fact an overbearing, tyrannical man who had raped her mother. She fought to suppress the memory of the pain and fear that still made her tremble, wanting badly to pretend she felt nothing. What did he do to you? Little Red's voice sounded sad and helpless, but not angry. Zoe dropped the dishes, the clattering echoing in her ears like one of the bombs she'd helped build. She gripped the edge of the sink to keep herself upright. Everything. All her work to build a new life seemed to disintegrate. She turned the water on and watched it flow through her fingers as tears filled her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. Why didn't you leave him?" Little Red wrapped her arms around her mother and rested her head on Zoe's shoulder. All thoughts of her marriage were inseparable from pain, both mental and physical. With the passage of so many years, the unhappy memories had faded, helping her find confidence and happiness in life again. She did not want to look back, but had to make Little Red understand. I don't need to explain what marriage was like during the Cultural Revolution. You probably already know that, especially from someone in my situation, working on such sensitive research. It was arranged by the party. Divorce would have been a crime. She dried her hands and led Little Red to the sofa. With the dreadful truth finally revealed, for the first time, she could admit that Little Red was Major Leo's daughter as well. From Zoe, she had gotten her pale skin and delicate frame, the smooth, straight hair that cascaded down her back, and her inquisitive mind. Yet Zoe could see Major Leo's mark on her as well. The thick dark brows and the full lips above her prominent chin. She reached out to pull her daughter close. "But we both loved you dearly." Little Red wiped away her tears and looked at Zoe, suddenly struck by how beautiful her mother was, even in her 50s. Years of hardship, misfortune, and melancholy could not destroy either her strong will or her elegant, refined face. The pain of the past showed only in a few wrinkles at the corners of her eyes and on her forehead, and of course, in the sadness in her eyes. Little Red suddenly realized how selfish she had been, prying into her mother's past and opening old wounds. She should simply have been grateful for her mother's presence and dedication. She tucked a few stray hairs behind Zoe's ear and said, "I'm sorry I upset you, Mama. I love you, and thank you for bringing me up. It wasn't easy, I know." Zoe smiled through her tears and patted Little Red's hand. "It's all right. Actually, Wai Po and Wai Gung did far more than I did when you were little. I wish I could have spent more time with you then. Either way, I had a lovely childhood, Mama. You did your best. Please don't feel guilty about it." Little Red hugged Zoe, laying her head on Zoe's shoulder with a contented sigh. The morning had turned grey and sullen after the brief, brilliant sunrise. Zoe scowled, thinking about the clothes she had washed and hung out to dry from the balcony earlier. As she got off the bus, the fine drizzle thickened into a heavy rain. Quickly, Zoe opened her umbrella and hurried across the road, joining the stream of people on the footpath. She got to Institute 1970 before the bell rang. Just 1 year ago, the armed soldiers at the gate had been replaced by the plainclothes security guards. She liked the more relaxed atmosphere at the facility now. Even the new sign on the post, East China Institute of Nuclear Technology, gave her a feeling of welcome. She smiled at the guards as she passed through the gate. In the lobby, she clocked in and stepped into the crowded lift, holding her bag close to her chest. She and Little Red had spent nearly 2 weeks putting together the statistics and data on safety protocols at Qingshan, the Chernobyl accident, and every other nuclear disaster they could find. Finally, she felt ready, confident that she could convince Director Chow to temporarily stop construction on Qingshan nuclear power plant. "Comrade Meng, both your obvious dedication to nuclear power and your initiative on this particular matter are very impressive," the General Party Secretary said. "But I'm not a nuclear scientist like you. Can you please explain again, in more simple terms, what the consequences of a Chernobyl-like accident at Qingshan would be?" Surprised that the General Party Secretary showed so much interest in her suggestion, Zoe barely hesitated. "If a similar incident were to happen here, Worst-case scenario would be that the reactor explodes, toxic smoke is released into the air, and strong winds carry radiation hundreds of kilometers inland, polluting the farmland and endangering people's life in the cities. Or the wind could go east and dump the toxins into the Yellow Sea, the East Sea, and even the Pacific Ocean, which means all the fish there would be toxic and unsafe to eat for at least 10 years. And regardless of wind direction, the air quality of any cities in the path will be extremely toxic as well. For the next 20 years, anything within a 30-kilometer radius from ground zero won't be livable. We are looking at extremely serious consequences. I'm just worried that the energy minister will think we're overreacting. After all, our research prior to construction was extensive and thorough, Director Du said, probing for flaws in her findings. I know, but my data suggests our research on nuclear accidents is too optimistic. We considered the immediate danger to the people and property within a 10-kilometer radius, but didn't consider the environmental impact on the land and water, or address procedures for dealing with contamination. For instance, the plan calls for us to use seawater to cool down the reactor in the event of an accident. But no one asked how, or even whether we should treat the water before dumping it back into the sea. Director Du flipped through Zoe's proposal again, before turning to the General Party Secretary. What do you think? The General Party Secretary nodded thoughtfully. I think the potential for consequences are serious enough that we need to consider the proposal. But we must act carefully. We can't stop construction, even temporarily. That might raise doubts about the project, or worse, cause a panic. Encouraged by his positive response, Zoe pressed on to finish her proposal. Basically, we have two options. We can either invite foreign experts to come here to inspect and examine our design and construction, to give us more accurate assessment of what we've done, or we can send a nuclear delegation to Western countries to inspect and learn from their facilities and discuss our project with them. Either approach would give us the opportunity to address any flaws in our design. I think the minister is more likely to accept sending a delegation overseas. That way we won't lose face if any significant problems are found, and we're less likely to be accused of leaking any secrets. What do you think? Rubbing his chin, Director Du looked at the General Party Secretary for approval. I don't think we should worry about being ridiculed by Western countries over this effort. Qingshan is our flagship nuclear plant, and ensuring that it will be constructed both on time and safely must be our top priority. Director Du smiled. Okay, I'll draft a proposal for the minister. Comrade Meng, excellent work. I'm going to recommend that you be part of the delegation.